Welcome back to our panel discussion, Using Facial Recognition to Secure the Homeland and Enhance Customer Experience, sponsored by NEC here on Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network. My guests today are Nick Megna, Unit Chief of the Biometrics Center of Excellence Program at the FBI. Patrick Grother is Computer Scientist at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Arun Vemery is Director of Biometrics and Identity Technology Center at the Department of Homeland Security, Science and Technology Directorate. And Matt Pruitt is Chief Federal Solutions Architect at NEC Corporation of America. And I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. And really interesting discussion we've had about the applications, the use cases, the development of algorithms in facial recognition. I guess we should talk briefly about one part of the face, which is the iris. And is that integrated into facial recognition, or is it a separate discipline? And if so, what about nostrils or lips or any other part that's on our visage? Matt?
So with iris, it's separate from face recognition in that usually iris is acquired using different light. You have to use infrared light to do that comparison. However, you can do iris recognition and face recognition and kind of combine the results to give a better answer, so to speak. So it heightens the security of the system. As we see more and more systems roll out that want to use biometrics to speed up the experience, I think you're going to see more and more systems start to use multiple biometrics to give a stronger result and more accuracy.
So multiple factors could be all biometrics as opposed to the passcode or something else. Yeah, Patrick, is that what NIST sees? Or
certainly there are cameras capable of taking face and iris almost simultaneously coming on the market, and that's an insurance policy against accuracy in a very large population. If you want to do identification in sort of hundreds of millions, maybe face wouldn't be enough, and then you might switch over to face and iris, as Matt said. Iris has got a long track record of having been evaluated. It has an advantage that it's not known to be a genetic trait, and therefore you would identify twins correctly, which face historically has struggled with.
Interesting. Yeah, that was a question I had earlier, actually, and didn't get to, is the idea of twins or multiples in facial recognition. I mean, some twins don't look alike and some do. There's different types of twins, but...
So at the very limit of face recognition, you're faced with identifying twins, and the algorithms are not capable, really, of doing that. Certain algorithms have been published in the past. They're not very practical and are not used. But yeah, genetic similarity is a problem, not for fingerprints and not for iris, but it is for face.
Interesting. Okay. And let's talk briefly about some of the system requirements, because these algorithms and facial recognition exist in an entire system, as we've discussed, say at airports and so on, where you've got to have the interface, and then you've got some kind of back end, and then some kind of decision mechanism to do that. It's a pretty complicated system. What are what are the requirements, and how do you look at the system in the context of facial recognition? Arun?
Yeah, so I'll actually kind of take it a step higher. Whenever you build one of these systems, you want to make it as fast, easy, intuitive to use as possible. If we're talking about an airport, let's put ourselves in the shoes of the traveler, right? You are trying to get somewhere. Passing a biometric process is probably not the top of your objective. You want to get to your seat and make sure you have enough room for your luggage, right? But so the thing is, when people
have to kill 5 people ahead of you and trip them.
It could be bad, right? Some days are stressful. Let's be honest here. So one of the things is, okay, when the person's objective isn't let me pass the facial recognition system or the biometric check, how do we provide the environment to make that process as likely to succeed as possible? Right. This means making sure that we have obviously important things like lighting and cameras and whatnot, but make the user experience as easy as possible. We've done tests where we've seen things, and we've worked with mission partners where there'll be this kiosk thing and like a little pinhole camera, and it'll say look at the camera, and people will turn and look at the camera in the corner of the room because that thing looks like a camera. Right, people when they're traveling, they're trying to, this comes back to some of the human factors we mentioned earlier, right? Take into consideration that people have a lot on their mind, they're trying to do a lot of things. How do we make the stuff so that it is intuitive or increase the affordance of the process? make it very effective so that the cameras, to Patrick's point before, are aware that I'm taking a photo of a face, and the camera will make the appropriate adjustments to try to get the best quality face, and that the algorithms are tuned so that they can adjust for the natural variation that people will have. Some people will have baseball caps, some people will wear glasses, some people will be looking at, let's say, their travel documents and may not be looking directly at the camera. Let's accommodate those natural behaviors and variations in human behavior and be able to use all those things well together. So a lot of it comes down to, yes, making sure you have lighting, camera, data connectivity, preferably fast response times, but also thinking about the person and the trying to accommodate and address the normal variations we see when people try to use these technologies.
And I guess that affects then the makeup and performance of algorithms, because if someone's looking down when they're being evaluated or looking over here or whatever the case might be, then some can handle that and some can't. Patrick?
It's a challenge. It remains a challenge. The envelope, the capture envelope is expanding. The algorithms have been trained more and more to sort of handle pose variations, and we quantify that in our published reports.
And Nick, how does the FBI look at the whole system requirement when deploying systems or helping, partner agencies at the state and local level with theirs?
So when we developed our next generation identification system, we collected 1,000 stakeholder requests from the criminal justice community, and we decomposed those into system level requirements. And the system that we delivered in 2014 had to meet those requirements for state and locals because they are our customers. And we premised that off of trade studies that we conducted, leveraging additional NIST studies for iris, for friction ridge, and for facial recognition. And we were able to meet all of those requirements, response times, highly available, but also maintain a flexible system that it can accommodate for new technologies, because we didn't want to have to go back and reinvent the wheel as things like iris became an option for us.
Yeah, so, and I imagine state and local partners are somewhat, or in many cases, are resource constrained.
Yes, I mean, we have 50 states, and we truly have 50 different situations and reference implementations. Some states are very advanced in their biometric operations, and some aren't so much, and they depend on us a little more. So we have to be flexible enough to accommodate for both of those implementations.
Sure, and Matt, can the algorithms then work in a variety of systems that may have different levels of resources?
Yeah, the algorithm really works as a central core, and then there's workflows that are around that. So when you're designing a system, you have to really look end to end, taking into account security from all these systems connecting to one central core, but also the quality of the images coming in. So you can imagine with 50 different states, different federal agencies all hitting one algorithm, you have different cameras, you have different quality, you have different lighting, and you have different use cases for every one of them. What you can look at is, what is the use case, how are the photos being acquired, and how do they get to the central system? That's how you get the end-to-end process.
Yeah, so in that sense it matches fingerprints in that you have to have at least a modicum of uniformity in how this work is done.
So with face, it's a little more uncontrolled. So you can have use cases, for instance, aviation. So you have passengers boarding a flight, not necessarily looking to use biometrics. They're looking at their ticket, fumbling to pick up their children, things like that. Whereas you also have mugshot uses for the state and local government where people are controlled, the lighting is controlled. So the quality of images that come into a facial recognition system like this can vary wildly.
Yeah, and Patrick, then that must come into the evaluations that NIST does, because if you have a minimal type of system that's looking at a variety of types of images, the processing requirements for the algorithm must be a factor. We talked about speed of throughput as well as accuracy, but also systems requirements would have a big effect on all of those factors, because if you need a supercomputer to get the qualities you want, well, that's not going to be practical either.
Yeah, the speed is one thing that we measure, memory usage. We see quite wide variations across the industry, so the hardware implications of that are quite significant. We measure this, there's some emphasis to speed things up because everybody wants a responsive system. So for example, that process I described earlier of taking a neural network, pushing an image through it, that really has to succeed sub-second for it to be an attractive proposition to an end user.
Right, and so Arun, in the case of Homeland Security, you've got a variety of situations, and sometimes it is the airline where you're comparing to all the people on that plane. Sometimes it's a situation where you might be comparing, where the user might be comparing to millions of people. And I imagine that must affect what you recommend the component agencies in terms of systems architecture. That is to say, do you have to reach out to a database in the cloud that has billions of identities in it, or just can you download what's coming in on the next 5 airplanes, which is only a few hundred?
Yeah, so that's actually a really good point. So with facial recognition in general, Patrick kind of mentioned this earlier, you may be dealing with a different, where the technology, and let me be honest up front, the technology is changing very quickly. Like just where it was 2 years ago to what we can support now with gallery size, that means the number of images we're comparing to, has increased significantly based on the performance. And this stuff is still happening. We would likely expect some additional improvements there. However, sometimes what we also see is we're trading off between different types of errors. So for example, if we took a face image and tried to match it to a gallery of, let's say, 1 billion people, right? That might not work the best. Or you would probably match to some other people in that gallery, right? Because for a variety of different reasons. So one of the things we're looking at in certain applications is, okay, using other information we have about the process, let's say a flight, we can say, here are the 200 people we're expecting on this flight. We can shrink down the gallery size to that specific gallery and to that specific flight and get much more confidence. So what we're doing is we're trading off errors between false accepts or false positives with whether that person is on or not, or is on that flight or not, with the ability of us to get good information about the biographics of who's supposed to be on that flight. So we can trade off between these different errors and control for certain things that we have good control over versus the things that are a little bit harder to. So yes, we definitely do those types of things. We try to make smart decisions in the design of the system so that we're less likely to encounter some of these errors.
So a lot of factors to consider when designing or thinking about systems. And Patrick, earlier you said there's been a revolution over the last several years in this facial recognition area. It sounds like that revolution is still rolling. Where do you think this is all headed?
Very, very much so. That is. We've seen algorithm developers produce new algorithms in a 3-month span this year that give markedly lower error rates than their previous effort. That's because the algorithms are becoming increasingly capable of taking poorer quality images. One outstanding problem will be aging, that over time we unfortunately more or less gracefully change our appearance, and that's sort of a one-way process. And the algorithms need to become more tolerant to that over time. Now, in some applications, you have the luxury of re-enrolling somebody. You get a passport every 10 years or maybe 5 years. But in criminal justice, for example, you don't get that opportunity, and you would have to maybe try and identify a 15-year-old or 20-year-old photo.
Sure, and Nick, I imagine another issue in law enforcement is the rise of gangs. Or a new generation of gangs, I guess, if you will. Some of them employ tattoos extensively, and a before and after of a tattooed or heavily tattooed face might pose a problem for facial recognition.
Right, absolutely, and we've seen that in the past with other biometrics. I think there are cases dating back to the Dillinger days of mutilations of fingerprints. That's the reason why our system is multimodal, where we have multiple biometrics that we can use. If we need to go to the friction ridge or the iris, as well as facial recognition, we could do that. But that is something that's on the horizon with regards to the newer biometrics.
Yeah, and so recognition, even in a vector system, change from makeup or tattoos or some other type of external application can affect a vector-based system, Patrick?
Yeah, if you make changes to the face, surgery or cosmetics or facial hair, if you make enough change, you will trip up the biometric system. It's no different than a fingerprint if you were to sandpaper off your fingerprints.
Yeah.
If you put a heavy contact lens in front of your iris, all biometrics can be defeated that way.
I guess, or have a facelift.
Enough of a facelift, maybe not a good one. But, yeah.
Just don't smile too hard afterwards,
Yeah.
I guess. All right, Matt, how does all this fold into the type of research and development going on behind the scenes at NEC?
So as we're doing more research and development, we're looking at bringing in other factors a lot to face recognition. So improving face recognition alone isn't the only answer. It's really bolstering that entire ecosystem. So with face, we're trying to improve performance with different angles, different lightings. In fact, the newest algorithm we have can identify face from 90 degrees, full profile images. But then you add in things like tattoo recognition to overcome those tattoos on the face. You add in iris, and you add in other information and fuse that into one result. You can get a better estimation of identity that's more secure and convenient, because you can have both. You can have convenient biometric technology while still maintaining security, or even heightening the security because it was so convenient.
So I imagine the ultimate is those silhouettes in the shade. You could identify who those people are.
Hopefully one day.
All right, that's a good place to end the discussion. I want to thank you very much for a fascinating and I think useful discussion for the people tuning in. Our guests today have been Nick Megna, Unit Chief of the Biometric Center of Excellence Program at the FBI. Patrick Grother is Computer Scientist at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Arun Vemery is Director of Biometrics and Identity Technology Center at the Department of Homeland Security, Science and Technology Directorate. And Matt Pruitt is Chief Federal Solutions Architect at NEC Corporation of America. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. You've been listening to Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search NEC.
On behalf of NEC, thank you for joining us. The archive session will be available shortly. If you qualified for continuing education credit, you will also receive an email with your training certificate. This concludes our discussion, and thank you.